on the Maximum State Prison in Kentucky when I was there in Eddyville, and Bays and Harold McQueen. When I was young, you did, because I was getting in a lot of trouble, you know, so I was fighting the guards and shit. I was, you know, bucking the system or whatever, so to speak, you know. And Harold McQueen was electrocuted. He was sentenced to death. He was already sentenced to death, but he was actually electrocuted like 2 weeks after I arrived at Eddyville, the Maximum State Prison in Kentucky. And like I said, I was on the other side of Rap Bays. Rap Bays was another death row inmate down Eddyville. And me and Rap became real cool. We got real cool. You know, he used to know for murdering the sheriff. You know, he told the sheriff, you know, to stay off his property. You know, the sheriff persisted to keep pulling up on the man's property. So one day the sheriff came through. He unloaded on the sheriff. You know, the sheriff tried to come up with his, property. You know, he's a man of principle. He didn't play come on his property. So he unloaded on the sheriff and took him out. You know, and like I said, I came to the joint in the Maximum State Prison. I was young and shit. And he was always keeping me calm, telling me to calm down. You know, stop fighting, stop fucking, and you know, going crazy and shit. You know, he's understanding my story. You know, where I came from and what I went through and shit in life. You know, he was, you know, pretty much sympathizing and understanding like. Fucked up how young, you know, black male, you know, we get so much injustice, you know, get so, you know, done so bad, you know, in the court system. And he explained this situation to me, you know, what happened to him, how it went down with him, how the sheriffs in the states, you know, police was trying to play him, trying to play games with him. And he got fed up, you know, and did the same. Well, like I say, when I was there in Intil, man, I experienced several riots, several race riots, you know, several lockdown periods. Down, you know. Beef and fighting with corrupt and crooked guards, you know, nasty, you know, racist guards, you know, fighting captains and fighting lieutenants and whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Down in the Maximum State Prison, I was sitting down there, I was sitting to long-term confinement in the Supermax at the Kentucky State Prison. Dude, you just got to shoot some shit at me and I shoot it back at you, man. Yeah, I met Felice Johnson in the Maximum State Prison in Eddyville, Kentucky. When I first came through the system, Felice was a lunatic. Felice was, you know, terrorizing the prison and terrorizing the guards. You know, Felice was, quote unquote, as they say on TV, the booty bandit and whatnot. You know, he was doing a lot of fighting, tearing up sinks, you know, tearing sinks out of the walls, tearing toilets out of the walls, you know, just down there trapped, you know, in the jungle. You know, Felice knew my family members from off the street. Felice knew a lot of my families from back in the day. So when he met me, you know, he was trying to find out, like, who was my people back home in Louisville and the West End. He's from the West End, I'm from the West End. So he, you know, acknowledging the fact that he knew a lot of my family members, that he went to school and grew up with a lot of my family members and whatnot. He was, you know, trying to convince me to not, you know, be like him, fight with the guards, you know, fight with the administration, you know, because they'll leave you locked up in confinement for years and years at a time. And, you know, he spoke intelligent words to me, even though he was acting a donkey. You know, he spoke a lot of intelligent words to me on the strength of he knew my family, and he knew also how corrupted and crooked that the system was, and that the politics that lies in the system, you know, it didn't favor the young black man, you know, growing up and doing time in the Maximum State Prison, you know. But like I say, he had already had beef, he had already had smoke with the administration, and, you know, I watched him, you know, throw scalding hot water, boiling hot water out of a hot pot. He put baby oil and Maggie shave in a hot pot and boiled it, and he threw it on the guard's face, a nasty racist guard that, you know, spitting in his food and abusing his authority on him. You know, he caught him coming through one morning when he first came to work. You know, early in the morning, Felice had already been there waiting on him, you know, with a hot pot, you know, boiling. You know, he put baby oil in it, he put Maggie shave in it, and it was already bubbling and boiling. When the motherfucker came through, you know, his name was Blood, or Young Blood. I'll never forget his name. He was a nasty, fat motherfucker named Young Blood. He used to always come through trying to torture the inmates, and always coming through, you know, playing with their food and playing with their drink. So Felice waited on him to come down the walk. When he came down the walk, Felice hopped out, threw it in his face and scalded his face and all the skin off his face, so it melted off his face. He's hollering and screaming and running around, you know, trying to get out, hollering, you know, for his life. Police stalking him, police baiting with the, you know, with the hotness. And, you know, they locked it down, of course. You know, they locked the thing down and brung the, actually for that incident, they brung the Goon Squad and the National Guard, state police, and everybody came in off the back of that. You know, they had dogs, K9 dogs, and guns and shit, to try to subdue Felipe. Felipe barricaded himself in the cell. He barricaded himself in the cell, but he couldn't get in there on him. And, you know, once he barricaded himself in the cell, so they couldn't get in there on him. You know, they came through and gave him multiple warnings, you know, so they had to get in there on him. So they sent in the K9s to attack him. They sent in the K9s to get him up out of there. He was throwing porcelain, he ripped the toilet off the sink, off the wall. He was throwing porcelain glass, big chunks of porcelain at the dogs. He was smacking the dogs in their face. He was smacking the K9 prison dogs in their face with the porcelain sheets to keep them off of it. They was trying to kill him. They was trying to attack him. They, you know, the master gave order to attack. When they gave orders to attack, you know, police had to defend themselves so they didn't, you know, eat him alive. You know what I'm talking about? And they got him, you know, and stripped him down and, you know, beat him, you know, drug him, beat him unmercifully, you know what I'm talking about? So he eventually bounced out from that. You know, he bounced back, had to do 3 or 4 years in isolation and segregation behind that. Came out again, full throttle, you know, a lot of dogs, friends with the one that he faced, you know, partners with the guard that he did it to, young blood. They try to retaliate, they try to harass him, they try to deal with him inappropriately. He, you know, defended himself again with ate shit on him, you know, went upside his head several times. You know what I'm talking about? They put him back over in the segregation, put him back over in the hole. They was keeping him in the hole for years and years. You know, they kept a lot of us over in the isolation. They kept a lot of us in the Supermax for years and years at a time, to the point where CNN News had to come down there and investigate. The Courier Journal newspaper out of Louisville, Kentucky had to come down and investigate the brutality and the long-term confinement, the long-term isolation, and the cruel and unusual punishment they was bestowing on us down in a little small country racist town of Edison. So they was interviewing us and whatnot, you know, and of course we had to deal with retaliation, you know. One incident, Lieutenant McGee, you know, was already abusing his authority and was already, you know, playing race games with me and a bunch of other younger, you know, African-American inmates that he didn't like, you know, that he had a strong distaste for, you know. And he ran up on me, and he snatched my glass out of Perriel's glass phone. You know, wire frame glasses at the time. We ordered glasses from different vendors, you know, once we had the money, you know, the vendors was allowed to send us in different glasses. So I had a pair of Perriel's wire frame glasses on my face. And Lieutenant McGee, you know, walked up on me. He was already mad because we was already demonstrating and sticking together and standing up. So he tried to snatch my glasses off my face, and when he snatched my glasses off my face, he cut my nose with the glasses. The glasses, you know, wire frame glasses, cut my nose. And I hit him with a 2-piece, you know, I hit him with a deuce, you know, knocked him down. Bam, you know. And when I knocked him down, hit him with a 2-piece, he stumped, you know, fell up and got up. And he poured his pepper spray, his OC spray out. And as he was falling, he was already grabbing for his OC pepper spray anyway, you know. Somehow he managed to get up off the ground and to spray me and to unload this whole can of OC spray on me. He unloaded this whole can of OC pepper spray in my face. So we dig it. Him and 2 or 3 other guards caught himself jumping me. They caught himself trying to gang me. And I was fighting all 3 or 4 of them. And of course, they locked me down in segregation and put me in the hole with a bunch of bogus ass infractions on me for defending myself. They had moved Ralph. Like I say, Ralph was really a quote-unquote model resident. You know, Ralph played a lot of chess. You know, Ralph's one of the ones. He's one of the older cats that taught me how to play chess. And Ralph was a model resident, even though he was on death row. He was a model resident. And they moved Ralph. They moved Ralph into another dormitory. They moved Ralph into another area because they felt that he had a lot of outside resources, which he did. You know, he had a lot of outside Christian groups. He had a lot of outside lawyers and a lot of outside people that was coming to see him on visit. You know, they was coming to see him, you know, and talking to him on the phone, you know, trying to keep him from being executed, you know, trying to keep him from being, you know, leap injected, you know, because they saw good in Ralph. He was just a man who had a situation with a crooked sheriff, you know, and things had to get out of hand, you know, things happened so fast. But they moved Ralph into another dorm, you know, so Ralph wasn't in the dorm with us too long. They moved it, you know, because they felt like he had a lot of outside resources that he could bring some attention and bring some light to a lot of different things that they was doing that was corrupted and crooked. So they rearranged the dorm, you know, they was rearranging the pods, you know, putting in different people and taking different people out. mainly, they were trying to stick all the young African Americans from Louisville and Lexington in the same area together, so they can, pretty much eliminate each other, so they can, gang bang and, stab each other up or do whatever. But for the most part, the brothers got along, for the most part, the brothers stood together, had to ride through it, even though some of them was blood, some of them was Crips, some of them was GD, it didn't even matter. When you lock down in Eddyville in the Magistrate Prison, they don't even, gangs didn't even really matter because we had to all stick together. So even though, like, somebody was a blood or somebody was a Crip or somebody was a GD, it didn't even matter. We all had to bond like brothers, what I'm talking about. So we could get through whatever sentences, we had, whatever time we had to bond together to get through this shit alive, to make it out. So they put a lot of, like I say, a lot of us all in the dorm together. And I watched a lot of them lose their life. I watched a lot of young African Americans from Louisville come down to prison, not know how to do time, not know how to adapt, not know how to get with a corrupted system. They lost their life, they became victims of guard brutality, they became victims of food poisoning, they became victims of lack of medical attention and medical treatment. But now, they died, like I said, I watched a lot of them die. I watched a lot of them die. When they killed Harold McQueen, one of my first execution, my first execution that I witnessed in Eddyville was Harold McQueen. Harold McQueen was executed less than 2 weeks. Once I arrived, they sent the busload of us to Eddyville. They sent the busload of us to the Magistrate Prison from another place because it was getting open. 97, 98. They sent the busload of us to Eddyville, because it was in the city of Louisville in the 90s. The gang shit was happening real tough in the late 90s, so prisons was getting overcrowded because there was a lot of gang banging, there was a lot of shooting in Louisville, so the prison system, was busting out of the hinges. So they was trying to put all the different classes of inmates from the inner city together at one prison so they could control them. So they sent us down Eddyville on a big bus, Grey Goose, shackled from head to toe. They sent all of us to Eddyville together on this bus, all black dudes from Louisville. And when we got down there, less than 2 weeks later was the first execution. I always heard about executions. I always heard about the lecture, but I never witnessed it until I got down there. My second week down there, and it was Harold McQueen. And Harold McQueen had already been locked up down there for over a decade or longer. And he was tired of waiting. He was tired of, walking dead. He was tired of, waiting to die. So he told him, he waived all his appeals. And he told the governor to come on with him. Bring it on. The governor at the time was an honorary-ass governor of Kentucky. He brought it on, he gave him what he wanted. And, they took him down to the base, they cut all the lights out, they cut everything off in prison, the lights, the phone, TVs, wasn't nothing on them. At the time, Raffle was on the side of me. And, I was clocking like, man, why they cutting all the lights and shit? I'm like, man, why they cut all the lights and the TV and the phones and everything? I was like, they about to have an execution. Seems like they're ready to execute somebody, so every time they execute somebody, they cut everything off because they don't want you to know what's going on. They don't want you to watch the news, or they don't want the people, on the outside to be on the telephone and, know what's going on the inside. So they shut everything down. So I'm clocking because I was young and I didn't know, so I'm clocking. And I'm beating and banging on the door. And I'm acting a donkey. Because I ain't never experienced, so Ralph was like telling me, younger, chill, relax, man, everything's gonna be okay, in the morning, everything will be back to normal because they do it for a whole 24 hours. They shut it down for a whole 24 hours. He was like, everything will be back. I'm like, nah, fuck it. I was young. I didn't give a fuck. I'm like, nah, I ain't racing. There's no block for no 24 hours. They do sack lunch. They don't even feed you real food. You gotta use sack lunch. They bring sack lunch. They bring juice through her. They do cold sack lunch and the juice. Well, they to the execution and everything, to the meeting and everything's all over with. So, I endured it right there. I'm saying, actually, I witnessed 3 executions. I witnessed 1 lecture and I witnessed 2 lethal injections the whole time. I was housed and locked up in the Magistrate Prison down there in Cleansville and Eddyville. Yeah. I'm saying, man, that place was a world of its own. Very, very unlike what you see on lockup or what you see on jail or anything you see on TV. And nothing like experiencing the real deal. Real life, experiences, from, people getting raped, the people getting brutalized, the police brutality to, just corruption from the administration, from the warden on down. It was a jungle. It was a concrete jungle. And like I say, they brought all of us down from Louisville on a bus, on a Grey Goose shackle from head to toe. They brought all of us down together from the inner city to try to break us, to try to break our spirits, to try to break out, try to take any hope from us. And like I said, I witnessed several riots. I experienced several riots down there, several race riots. I watched a multitude of people get shanked. I watched a multitude of people get killed. I watched a multitude of people get piped with metal pipes. You know, I've watched gang, you know, just, I witnessed so much being incarcerated down in the prisons in the state of Kentucky. And I endured my first share of wars as well. You know, I made it out. Yeah, but it was an experience like none other. You know, I found my true talent. You know, I found my true talent for writing books. I found my true talent for writing movie manuscripts. I found my true talent, you know, for writing, of course, the best hip hop, you know, the best rap, the Tupac. You know, I tapped in to my true higher self when I was housed at my lower self at the Kentucky State Prison in Intil. And I was really living a life that no youth should ever have to endure. No youth from the inner city, from the hood, from the ghetto, from the street. You're not ready for it. Actually, I went to Kentucky State Prison. I was down at Kentucky State Prison 3 or 4 different times from 3 or 4 different other institutions. You know, they would send me to another institution. I would get in trouble, or I would get put in an investigation, or whatever the case may be. They would always send me back to the Capitol because the Capitol was on my jacket. You know, one thing about the Capitol, once it's on your jacket, then the other smaller prisons are never going to hesitate to send you right back to the Capitol. They don't really want you in their facilities anyway once you've been to the Capitol, because they feel like anybody who was housed in the Capitol, anybody who was locked in the Maxwell State Prison should have to stay there. They should never be able to get out until they get out of prison or until they die. So I found myself at the Kentucky State Prison, housed in there at least 4 or 5 different occasions throughout the years, over a decade, over a 10-year period, off and on.